The inside story on the issues that affect you and your community. This is Local 12 Newsmakers.
Good morning and welcome to Local 12 Newsmakers. The issue of undocumented immigrants is reverberating through the political system, from Congress and the White House to the Arizona legislature, and as we have seen this past week, to the fiscal courts of Boone and Kenton County. The issue operates on many levels. Though in national debate, it is fueled by international economic changes, especially in Mexico and Central America. It is a legal debate. The passage of what is referred to as Senate Bill 1070 in Arizona has crystallized the issue. On Friday, President Obama signed a new law to strengthen the ability of the federal government to enforce immigration laws along the borders. In recent months, people have called not only for new legislative action, but for the repeal of a portion of the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution that recognizes that anyone born in the United States is a citizen. And it is a powerful partisan issue, a wedge issue, capable of energizing voters and contributors. On Tuesday night, the fiscal courts of Kenton and Boone County in northern Kentucky passed resolutions prompted by the Northern Kentucky Tea Party endorsing the new Arizona immigration law. To discuss this action on the local level, I am joined this morning by Duane Skavdahl. I told you I'd mess it up. Skavdahl, an attorney with the firm of Smith Rolfes and the vice president of Northern Kentucky Tea Party, and Deifilia Diaz, who was raised in Mexico City. Her family moved to Cincinnati in 2006. She is currently a third-year student at Chase Law School, where she is the president of the Latino Student Association. Welcome to Newsmakers.
Good morning.
Thank you.
Duane, let's start out with, the prompt for this is the actions in Boone County and Kenton County. What is it exactly that those two fiscal courts did on Tuesday night?
They simply passed resolutions supporting the right of the state of Arizona to pass the law that had passed, in which they urged more strict enforcement of the immigration laws of our country, which essentially have been ignored for the last 20 years by the federal government. All that was passed was a resolution in support. I might point out that Arizona is not the only state with similar laws. There are other states that actually have stronger laws on the books, and several other states are considering laws as well.
And what motivated the courts to take this action at this point?
Well, I'm assuming what motivated the court is the Tea Party putting a resolution in front of them. There are three pillars to the Tea Party movement, one of them being limited government. Obviously, what everyone is concerned about, or what people are concerned about in the Tea Party movement, is there's too much power being amassed at the federal government. That was never intended by the founders of our country. And even though people may want the government to take action on this issue, the next 5 issues that come down the road, they may not want the federal government to have that much power. So what we feel is the government should be limited in power as to what they're doing, but in this case, what the government is doing is not enforcing its own laws. In 1986, we passed amnesty. We were told at the time that no more than 800,000 people. It turned out to be 300 or 3.5 million people. Then after that, we've had 2 Democratic, 2 Republican administrations, and they haven't enforced the law. That's why we have the problem we have right now, and all Arizona did is pass a law saying, let's enforce the laws that we have and make it stronger, because we have a problem that is serious, and it is becoming more serious all the time.
Deifilia, let's begin with the fact that what happened in Boone and Kenton County, it wasn't an adoption of any local action here. It was just an expression of support. And as I understand, you were at Boone County and spoke against this. Since it doesn't change anything here, what's the problem?
Well, we have to take into consideration how it's going to affect in the long term, why we're supporting Arizona law. So people here in Boone County and the Cincinnati area feel that we should not be doing extending the support to Arizona law because of the arguments against this law. We should not be supporting a law that is racial profiling against immigrants, against what is called undocumented, or is called mostly illegal. And I will encourage people to not call it illegals because they're not committing any crime by any means. It's not in the criminal code, it's an administrative offense, although we call it that way. So we are concerned how it's going to be impacting in the long term, how it's going to be impacting the neighboring counties, how it's going to be impacting the Kentucky state, and why we are expressing support for a law that is held that it was injuncted.
Okay, so that's your objection to this expression of support. What's your, and you hinted at some of these, but your objection to the Arizona law? As Duane said, all that Arizona is trying to do is to enforce the federal laws that the federal government has not been enforcing. What's wrong with that?
It's going beyond that because the Arizona law is giving power to the police officer to stop individuals, yes, on their probable cause when they have reasonable suspicion that the individual is unlawfully present in the United States. The law mentioned that the police officer do not have to go based in race, gender, or color, skin, etc. But they don't give any guidelines. So how they're supposed to get this discretion? They're putting too much discretion on the police officer to make this determination. We have seen that the police officer sometimes abuses discretion. We have seen this in the T visas, U visas, when we put discretion on authorities or a police officer, and it has been abused. So it tends to be abused, it can be abused, so we don't have to go to that risk and put all these individuals until that risk and be racial profiled.
Duane, what about that? What about the problem of probable cause and the power that this gives police?
This is where we have a real disagreement.
Okay.
The Arizona, because you stated as a matter of fact, this law results in racial profiling. I won't embarrass you and ask you the question because the President of the United States, the Attorney General, the head of Homeland Security, who was a former governor of Arizona, all spoke out about claiming that this law did racial profiling, and none of them had read the law. The law specifically prohibits racial profiling. That is actually in the wording of the law.
But I think that's what Deifilia was saying. But what are the standards?
But wait, what she's saying is, wait a second, the police officers, whether police officers or sheriffs, they exercise discretion every day in their jobs. That's part of their job. It's part of the difficulty of their job. If you talk to police officers, they have a lot of discretion all the time. What Deifilia is arguing is that this law automatically racially profiles. It does not. Now, it is true that a high percentage of the people in the country who are here illegally are Hispanic. Well, okay, that's not necessarily racially profiling if we find a lot of those type of people who are here undocumented. And it is against the law to be here illegally. You can call them undocumented or anything you want. They are still breaking the law of the country. Police officers have discretion. The law in Arizona clearly does not allow a police officer to walk up to anyone and say, "Show me your papers." The law says you have to have committed another crime with probable cause before the police officer can stop you. Then he can ask for documentation. Now wait a minute, we have that all the time. We get pulled over for speeding, we better have a driver's license, we better have our car registration. When we go to vote, when we go to give blood.
So this is a secondary concern after some other issue has arisen, is what your argument is. Pulled over for something else, and then you follow up on that.
And, if I may finish, immigrants who are in this country legally are required by law, by the Code of Regulations, Code of Federal Regulations, to have their immigration papers with them. That's been the law of this country since the 1950s. That's not something new that this law is putting in place. All this law is doing.
I'm aware of time. Let's make sure.
If that is true, that is a regulation. What Arizona is going to do is make it a crime. So it is not holding a driver's license. It will be holding for you a passport, your birth certificate. For me, it probably be holding my green card. So it is putting a burden on citizens. So how we are going to be determine that an individual is here legally if it's not going to be based on the color of his skin or their accent or how they look like.
You know, last week I had two guests on because of a screening of a film that occurred on Wednesday night called 9500 Liberty, which focused on developments in Prince William County in Virginia in 2007. And the ultimate turning point in that was where the longtime sheriff, I mean, a very similar law got passed in Prince William County, ultimately got reversed, but the turning point in that was when the sheriff was resistant because he said it put an undue burden and put the police officers in an impossible situation. And ultimately it was the support of the sheriff by not just the immigrant community but the rest of the community that really turned that around. So police officers are concerned about this too.
But not all police officers. There are many sheriffs in Arizona who are strongly supporting this law, also heads of police department and so forth. It's certainly not universal that all police leaders of sheriff's departments.
Absolutely, I agree with that.
I want to mention how the discretion has been abused and how we tend, and this is a risk that we should have stopped, that we have a crime that a 14-year-old was murdered in the border because of this discretion. We cannot give this unlimited power to police officers. We are treating with human beings. This is a humanitarian argument behind this.
Isn't there also, and you're the two lawyers, but isn't there in the Constitution, isn't the immigration question a federal responsibility? Isn't that part of what's at stake with the Arizona law? Now, the counter argument is the federal government hasn't been effective at enforcing its own laws. But in fact, isn't this a federal responsibility, not a state responsibility?
Yes, it is. And that's why the injunction was put in place, because it's called preemption. And there's many arguments. We can look at that. It is called preemption, Article 7, Clause 2 of the Constitution that talks about that. And just because the system is broken, and I wanted to give you that, the system is broken, but just because of that, we don't have to in place that, and we have to pass the Constitution like that.
Duane, I want to give you a chance on that.
Certainly. Even though it may be a federal law, there aren't enough federal authorities to enforce it. You have to enforce it all the time with local officials. And I'll point out something that you did. You immediately started talking about the law about racial profiling. The federal lawsuit does not mention racial profiling. There's not one word in the federal lawsuit about racial profiling. The federal lawsuit is brought on one ground and only one ground, and that is preemption. There's nothing in the federal lawsuit that says one word about racial profiling.
And that's why I brought that up, because that is, from a constitutional point of view, that's the issue.
Certainly, but the Arizona law, like the laws in other states, does not change federal law. All it does in Arizona is says, hey, we're actually going to enforce it, and if we find people who are here illegally, we're going to turn them over to ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, because remember, officials in Arizona can't deport people.
Right.
All they can do is turn them over to the federal government. The federal government then has to take the actions to deport people who are not here properly.
What do people in, here you are, you're here legally, you're active in the Hispanic community, what do you recommend be done about the undocumented that do come across the border? What is the right thing to do? Do you agree that that is a legitimate issue to be concerned with? And secondly, is that something that somebody should do something about?
We should certainly have to do something. The system is broken, as I said. We have to make coalition instead of segregating political views. We should do something about the people that is already here, because all these people are doing a life here. They are bonded to the community. They are having kids. These kids are going to school. Their kids are growing and working for America. We have to do something about the people that is here. We have to implement something for people to come over, because it's not going to stop. It hasn't.
To what extent do you see the passage of NAFTA and CAFTA, Central American Free Trade Agreement, having so changed the economies in Mexico and Central America that actually drive, the only thing that can't cross borders is labor. Everything else can cross. And at the time those were passed, people said, wait a minute, we're creating a big problem here. And so that in fact, U.S. policy has created situations in both Central America and Mexico that economically are driving a lot of people just to find jobs so they can support their families, send money back. What do you do about that? Do you agree that that's part of the issue?
It is part of the issue. I was recently in Europe and I was struck about how there is no borders. You know, the European Union doesn't have any borders. We can commute, well, they can commute to any of the neighboring states, and they see each other as brothers and sisters to work for one main goal. Why we cannot work on that like that? I'm not saying that we have to lessen the borders. I'm just saying why we cannot implement that if the goods are passing like that through the borders.
I really have to disagree with you, and you're saying that it is American policy that is driving illegal immigration. Now, certainly,
A part of it.
Yeah, certainly there's an element where people coming from a poor economy hoping to get a better job. Everybody understands that. I'm not sure that NAFTA had any real significant effect on our immigration problems as much as economic problems throughout the world. What has happened to our economy, what has happened to the economy of other countries. People, I think, are naturally going to go where they think they can find a job for their family. But here's something I want to point out, that we're not all brothers in the world. Mexico has a problem in their southern border because they try to keep illegal aliens from Central American countries coming across that border. You look at their immigration laws compared to ours, they are extremely harsh.
These are issues all over the world.
This is a very shameless argument. Just because Mexico is doing that, America should be doing that. I think that America has to be recognized to be better job than that. We are fighting in Afghanistan trying to fix some injustices, but just here we cannot fix our injustices that we are doing here. Just because Mexico has a broken system, are we allowed to do the same? I don't think that that should be a good argument for that.
I am out of time, unfortunately. Thank you both for very much for being here, and I got a feeling this issue is going to continue to percolate in Kentucky and Ohio, so maybe you'll be back.
Thank you.
Stay tuned. After the break, a conversation with a local author about her first novel that explores the life of an African-American woman who moves to Liberia in search of real freedom. Welcome back. Many of us believe we have something to say and think that the best way to communicate is through a novel. A whole lot of people have a partially written novel in their desk drawer someplace. This morning I'm joined by a local woman who has finished that novel and seen it published. Diane Jordan-Grizzard is the Chief Operating Officer of Beach Acres Parenting Center, who has just published her first novel, Free Soil, which has been released by Tate Publishing and Enterprise. Diane, welcome to Newsmakers. There's the cover.
Thank you, Dan.
How's it feel to have this come out?
It is a dream come true. I mean, when you put that much time and energy working on something, fueled by your passion, to actually see it to come to fruition, it's kind of surreal. And I'm so excited.
So much time. How long have you been writing?
I have been actually writing the book since 2005. Started with some classes at Women Writing for Change, and I just could not let it go. I could not let it go until it was finished.
Now this book has an incredible scope to it. I mean, it starts in the 18th century, it comes up to the present, it starts, it starts in Africa, it comes to the colonies, it comes to the United States, it goes back to Liberia. I mean, geographically, time-wise, there's incredible scope to all of this. Why, and was there a personal way that you could, did this somehow express something that's very personal for you, or was this, is this historical, sort of distant type of kind of?
Well, it is a historical fiction, obviously, in terms of genre, but the reason why it has that scope is because when I decided, when it came to me to write this book, I was sitting in a restaurant in Liberia, and I was reading the newspapers post-coup, post the execution of all of the cabinet in Talbert's office. I was reading all about the bans on rice, the insurgencies that were taking place, and all of the ongoing turmoil that was clear to me was not going to end anytime soon. And I asked myself, how did this all happen? And when I asked myself that question and really began to ponder it, I realized that it didn't start at the coup. It literally started when Liberia was born, which happened to be in America. So that's why I had to start at the beginning of the story.
So let's make this clear, because you kind of slid over it. You've lived in Liberia.
I lived in Liberia for 5 years. Both of my sons were born there, so they're dual citizens. And I was a midwife. I ran a business, and
the prime character here
Correct.
is a midwife.
She
So
is a midwife.
there's a lot of autobiographical elements to this?
Actually, it is not autobiographical. I am not the character and she is not me. She takes a lot of risks that I don't take. I probably take risks that she doesn't take. But I can say that she experiences in the story a lot of the things that I actually experienced. And actually what I've learned in writing is that all of your characters are a piece of you. So some of you gets a chance to play in all these other people's lives. And so that there's a lot of value that comes from that.
A great professor I knew at one point said the real value in life was passing over from one person to another in your lifetime and trying to see reality through their eyes and stand in their shoes if it's only for a moment. And so it's not just the one character, it's all
of them. And that is such a critical point, Dan, and even the way I chose to write the story and the kinds of characters that I tried to highlight. Because one of the things I realized as I considered how did this all happen is that there was such rooted class division that was taking place, and I wanted to pay attention and see the world through those people's eyes. So that's, you kind of see that perspective throughout the story.
You know, especially in America, in the scenes in the United States, they are filled with these details and these stories and references. And it seems to me, and you and I know each other a bit, is this part of the oral tradition of your family that you're able to draw on lots of these references? Actually,
I can tell you the only person in the story that has some basis in reality is Uncle Scotty. I actually have an Uncle Scotty who went through all of the civil rights movement, and he is still my heart, and he has told me all of the details of the stories that he actually lived through.
Well, there's those stories, but there's stories that even go much farther back, and somehow, sometimes I say, oh, I know where you could find out that kind of detail. I'm a historian, so I'm an 18th century historian, so I know where I could find that detail. But there are much of this just seems to me that it has to be part of the culture you grew up in.
Yes.
And you're translating it for the reader.
Correct.
And what it said to me was, we sometimes forget about the power of the tradition that we come out of. We may not understand it, but it's part of us. And there's all those little pieces are there.
That is so true. And I love listening to the elders in my family tell stories. And sometimes if you just sit back and listen to them talk, don't interview them necessarily because they would be put off by that, but just listen. And I did. I grew up listening to stories that they forgot themselves by now that they even knew growing up.
There's a dominant There's an image that keeps coming through in this book, and that is dreaming. Dreaming and limitations, it seems to me. What's the power of the dream for you?
You know, I believe, Dan, that each of us has a dream. Perhaps a calling on our heart, on our life, just like writing this book became a calling for me. And I also believe that when we fulfill those dreams, not only are we fulfilling something for ourselves, I believe that we are actually meeting an unmet need in the world, that we are giving an opportunity for someone else to access a resource or an opportunity that might be limited in their current circumstance. And so you're right, that is really something that I hope that everyone can take away from reading the story, that there are little acts that if we're doing and following our dreams, that there are little acts that we can do for someone else that could change the trajectory of that person's life. So yes.
There's also the counterbalance there that it seems to me you're also, there's characters in here who believe they have choices that there really are there aren't any choices.
Correct.
And it's a coming to grips with the limitations of life.
Of life, that's absolutely correct. And but all we have is hope and faith. Faith is the evidence of things not seen, and people live off of that. And it keeps us alive. And I knew people in Liberia who all they had was faith and courage to face the next day, despite the limitations in their life. But that was resilience for them. And that was one of the things that I tried to highlight.
This isn't about the novel so much, but do you stay in touch with friends in Liberia?
I do. Actually, one of the persons that I knew there and came back here, who lives here, and he's moved to Chicago now, encouraged me to write the book, and said, you must tell this story. And so, yes.
Are you hopeful for Liberia?
Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, I think, is a powerful person. She is Africa's and Liberia's first female head of state, elected head of state. And I have so much hope and faith that she is going to do great things. She already has done great things for that country.
Okay, it's Free Soil, Diane Jordan-Grizzard. And if you're interested in getting the book, but also meeting Diane, there's a book signing at Joseph Beth Bookseller at Rookwood Commons this Tuesday, August the 17th at 7 o'clock in the evening, and there's a chance to interact. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Great to have gotten this out and been able to write this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. Join us again next week to meet the women and the men shaping our community for the future. Have a good week.